The pain tore through her ankle like fire, and Rosalie Calloway knew immediately that she was going to die in these woods. She'd been an idiot to take the shortcut through Thornwood Forest after sunset. Everyone in the town of Ashenmore knew better. But her shift at the hospital had run late, and the main road added 15 minutes to her walk home, and she'd been so tired that common sense had fled. Now she was on her knees in the dirt, staring at the twin puncture wounds on her ankle, and the serpent slithering away into the underbrush, pale scales catching the moonlight.
No, no.
No, she whispered, pressing her hand to the bite. Already her skin was beginning to swell, the flesh around the punctures turning dark. Her phone was in her bag, but her fingers were shaking too badly to find it. The venom was spreading fast. Too fast, she managed to pull the phone out, but there was no signal this deep in the forest. Of course there wasn't. Rosalie tried to stand, thinking maybe she could make it back to the road, but her leg buckled beneath her. The venom was already doing its work, numbing the limb racing toward her heart. She'd seen snakebite victims in the emergency room before. She knew what came next. Paralysis, respiratory failure, death. She was 24 years old, and she was going to die alone in the dark. That was when she heard the footsteps. Not the tentative steps of another lost hiker, but measured, unhurried strides that seemed to make the very air grow colder. Rosalie's breath caught. The footsteps were coming closer, and some primal part of her brain was screaming that whatever was approaching was far more dangerous than any serpent. Then he stepped into the moonlight, and Rosalie forgot how to breathe. He was the most beautiful and terrifying thing she had ever seen. Tall, impossibly tall, dressed in black that seemed to drink in the shadows around him. His skin was pale as fresh snow, luminous in the darkness, and his hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic features, ageless and perfect, but it was his eyes that made her heart stutter. They were crimson, bright as fresh blood, and fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place. "You're hurt," he said, and his voice was like velvet over steel, accented with something old and foreign. "Snake," Rosalie managed, her tongue already feeling thick in her mouth. "Viper, I think. I need help. Please." He moved toward her, each step deliberate and controlled, and crouched down beside her. Up close, she could see that he wasn't breathing. His chest didn't rise and fall. He was utterly, impossibly still. "Show me," he commanded. Rosalie extended her leg, wincing as fresh pain shot through the limb. He took her ankle in his hands, his touch cold but surprisingly gentle, and examined the bite. His expression darkened. "Ashwood viper," he said. "The venom is already in your bloodstream. You have perhaps 10 minutes before your respiratory system begins to fail." "I know," Rosalie whispered. Tears were burning in her eyes now. "I know. I work at the hospital. I know what happens." "Then you know you won't make it back to town in time." She nodded, a sob catching in her throat. This stranger, with his impossible beauty and his blood-red eyes, was right. She was going to die here, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. "Please," she heard herself say. "I don't want to die alone." Something shifted in his expression. For a moment those crimson eyes softened, and she saw something ancient and sad looking back at her. "You won't," he said quietly. Then, before she could ask what he meant, he lowered himself to the ground beside her injured ankle. "This will feel strange. Don't be afraid." "What are you?" He placed his mouth over the bite and began to draw the venom out. Rosalie gasped. The sensation was like nothing she'd ever experienced, a pulling that went deeper than her skin, deeper than her veins. She could feel the poison being drawn from her flesh, could feel his mouth working against her skin, cool and firm and impossibly gentle. It should have been horrifying. Instead, she found herself transfixed, unable to look away from the sight of this beautiful, impossible man kneeling in the dirt to save her life. He pulled back after several long moments, turning his head to spit the venom onto the ground. Where it landed, the earth hissed and smoked. He repeated the process 3 more times, drawing out the poison with a methodical precision that spoke of practice, of knowledge far beyond what any ordinary person should possess. When he finally lifted his head, his lips were stained dark with her blood and the venom, but his eyes were clearer than before, more focused. He looked at her with something like satisfaction. "The venom is gone," he said. "You'll live." Rosalie stared at him, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. "You saved me." How did you know to do that? How did you know it would work?" A slight smile curved his lips, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp, canines that were just a bit too long. "I've had 3 centuries to learn the properties of various toxins and poisons. And vampire venom is far more potent than anything a serpent can produce." Drawing out the snake's poison was a simple matter. The world seemed to tilt. Vampire, yes. Rosalie should have been terrified. She should have been scrambling away from him, running for her life. But he'd just saved her. He'd knelt in the dirt and drawn poison from her wound with his own mouth, risking contamination, risking who knew what else to keep her alive. "Thank you," she whispered. He inclined his head, the gesture oddly formal. "You're welcome, Rosalie Calloway. How do you know my name?" I know everyone who lives in Ashenmoor, he said simply. It's my territory, my responsibility to protect. He rose to his feet with fluid grace, then extended a hand to her. Can you walk? Rosalie took his hand, surprised by the strength in his grip as he pulled her upright. Her ankle was tender but functional, the swelling already beginning to recede. I think so. Who are you? Kyril Ashwood, he said, and she saw his mouth twist slightly at her sharp intake of breath. Ah, so you do know the name. Everyone in Ashenmoor knew the name Ashwood. The family had founded the town 300 years ago, had built the massive estate that loomed on the hill overlooking the valley. The current Ashwood lord was reclusive, never seen in town, but his money supported half the local businesses. Rosalie had always assumed the Ashwoods were just another family of wealthy recluses. She'd never imagined they were vampires. The vampire king of the Eastern Territories. Kyril continued, watching her face carefully. Lord of Ashenmoor and all the lands within 100 miles, and you, Rosalie Calloway, have just become a very unexpected complication in my existence. I don't understand. You will, he said softly. But first, let me escort you home. These woods aren't safe after dark. Because of the snakes, she asked weakly. His smile was sharp and humorless. Among other things. He offered her his arm, the gesture courtly and old-fashioned, and after a moment's hesitation, Rosalie took it. His body was cool beneath the expensive fabric of his sleeve, and he matched his pace to her limping stride as they began walking through the forest. Why did you help me? She asked after several minutes of silence. Would you rather I had left you to die? No, but I've heard stories about vampires. You're supposed to be dangerous. Predators. We are, Kyril agreed. But we're also capable of honor, of duty, of compassion. I am the king of these territories. Every human who lives within my borders is under my protection. That includes you. Rosalie glanced up at him, studying his profile in the moonlight. So it was just duty, nothing personal? Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to read. I didn't say that. Before she could press him further, they emerged from the forest onto the main road. Her apartment was only a few blocks away, a modest building on the edge of town. Kyril walked her to her door, silent and watchful, his presence somehow both comforting and unnerving. Thank you, Rosalie said again, fumbling for her keys. For saving my life. I don't know how I can ever repay you. You can stay out of Thornwood Forest after sunset, Kyril said. That would be sufficient. I will, I promise. She unlocked her door, then paused. Will I see you again? His crimson eyes met hers, and she saw something hungry and conflicted in their depths. Yes, he said quietly. I'm afraid you will. Whether that's fortunate or disastrous remains to be seen. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows so completely it was as if he'd never been there at all. Rosalie stood in her doorway for a long moment, her heart pounding, her ankle aching, her mind whirling with 1,000 questions. Then she went inside, locked the door behind her, and tried to convince herself that the entire encounter had been a venom-induced hallucination. She almost succeeded. The next morning, Rosalie woke to find a letter slipped under her door. The paper was heavy and expensive, the handwriting elegant and precise. It read simply, "You have questions? Come to Ashwood Manor tonight at sunset. The gates will be open for you. K.A." Rosalie held the letter in her trembling hands and knew that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. She should have thrown the letter away. She should have ignored it, should have gone to work and pretended that nothing had happened. Instead, she found herself standing in front of Ashwood Manor as the sun began to set, her heart hammering against her ribs. The manor was even more imposing up close. It was built in the Gothic style, all soaring spires and arched windows, surrounded by wrought iron gates and manicured gardens. As Kyril had promised, the gates were open. Rosalie walked through them on shaking legs, following the stone path to the massive front doors. Before she could knock, the doors swung open. A woman stood there, tall and pale and beautiful, with white hair swept up in an elegant knot. Her eyes were the same crimson as Kyril's. "Miss Calloway," the woman said, her voice cool and measured, "His Majesty is expecting you. Please, come in." Rosalie followed her into an entrance hall that belonged in a museum. The floors were polished marble, the walls lined with oil paintings that looked centuries old. A crystal chandelier hung overhead, casting warm light over everything. "This way," the woman said, leading Rosalie through a maze of corridors to a pair of double doors. She knocked once, waited for a muffled response from within, then pushed the doors open. "Miss Calloway, Your Majesty." Kyril was standing by the fireplace, dressed now in more casual clothing, though it still managed to look regal on his tall frame. His white hair was pulled back from his face, revealing the sharp angles of his features. When he saw her, something eased in his expression. "Thank you, Seraphine," he said to the woman. "That will be all." Seraphine bowed slightly and left, closing the doors behind her. Rosalie and Kyril were alone. "You came," he said. "You said I'd have questions." "And do you?" Rosalie laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "About 1,000, starting with why a vampire king would bother saving a random human woman in the woods." Kyril gestured to a pair of chairs by the fire. Sit, please. This conversation will be easier if we're both comfortable. Rosalie sat, and Kyril settled into the chair across from her. Up close in the firelight, he was even more striking than he'd been in the forest. His beauty was almost painful to look at, otherworldly and perfect. 300 years ago, Kyril began, I was turned by a vampire lord who wanted an heir. I was a prince then in the old country, and I brought my title with me into this new life. Over the centuries, I've built my power, expanded my territory, and established myself as one of the vampire kings of this continent. Ashenmoor is my seat of power. Every vampire within 100 miles answers to me, and every human is under my protection. Why protect humans? Rosalie asked. If you're so powerful, why not just feed on us? Because I'm not a monster, Kyril said quietly. I take what blood I need from willing donors, from blood banks, from those who understand what I am and consent to the exchange. I have no interest in terrorizing the innocent or turning my territory into a hunting ground. My people live in peace with yours, and it's my duty to maintain that peace. Your people, Rosalie repeated. How many vampires are there in Ashenmoor? 17 at last count. Most of them live here in the manor with me. A few maintain residences in town, posing as reclusive artists or eccentric scholars. We're careful to avoid attention. Rosalie was quiet for a moment, processing this. Why are you telling me all of this? I'm nobody. I'm just a nurse. Why do I matter? Kyril leaned forward, his crimson eyes intense. Because when I tasted your blood last night, something happened. Something I've never experienced before in 3 centuries of existence. What? Rosalie whispered. I felt the bond, he said simply. The connection. You're my mate, Rosalie. My destined one. The person I've been waiting for since the night I was turned. The room seemed to spin. That's impossible. Vampire mates are rare, but they're real. It's a connection that goes beyond logic, beyond choice. From the moment I tasted your blood, I knew. You were made for me, and I for you. I don't believe in destiny, Rosalie said weakly. Neither did I, Kyril admitted. But I believe in what I felt. And I think if you're honest with yourself, you felt it too. Rosalie wanted to deny it, but she couldn't, because there had been something, hadn't there? When he'd touched her, when he'd drawn the venom from her wound, she'd felt a pull toward him that went deeper than gratitude, deeper than attraction. Like recognizing someone she'd been searching for her entire life. This is insane, she said. Yes, Kyril agreed. It is. Which is why I wanted to speak with you, to be honest about what's happening. You have a choice, Rosalie. You can walk away from this, from me, and I'll ensure that you're never bothered by any vampire again. You can live your human life in peace, or you can stay and we can explore this connection between us, see where it leads. And if I stay, then you'll be courted by a vampire king, Kyril said, a slight smile playing at his lips. I'll treat you with the respect and care you deserve. I'll answer your questions, show you my world, give you time to adjust to all of this. And if you decide, ultimately, that this life isn't for you, I'll let you go. But I hope you'll give me a chance, Rosalie. Give us a chance. Rosalie looked into his crimson eyes and saw nothing but sincerity there. This ancient, powerful creature was offering her a choice, was giving her power in a situation where she had every right to feel powerless. I need time to think, she said. Of course, take all the time you need. Kyril stood, extending his hand to help her up. Seraphine will show you out. But Rosalie, if you decide to return, you're always welcome here. The gates will always be open for you. Rosalie took his hand, felt that strange pull again, that sense of rightness. She looked up at him, at this impossibly beautiful, impossibly dangerous man who claimed she was his mate, and knew that whatever she decided, her life would never be the same. I'll come back, she heard herself say. Tomorrow night I want to learn more. Kyril's smile was radiant. Tomorrow night then. I'll be waiting. Seraphine appeared as if summoned, escorting Rosalie back through the manor to the front doors. As Rosalie walked back through the gardens toward the gates, she glanced back once and saw Kyril standing in one of the upper windows, watching her leave. She raised a hand in farewell, and he inclined his head in response. Then she turned and walked home, her mind spinning with possibilities and her heart beating faster than it had any right to. The next evening Rosalie returned to Ashwood Manor, and the evening after that, and the one after that, each visit brought new revelations. Kyril introduced her to the other vampires who lived in the manor, each of them beautiful and strange and oddly welcoming. There was Seraphine, who served as Kyril's second-in-command, cold and efficient but fiercely loyal. There was Lucien, a former French nobleman who played the piano beautifully and told outrageous stories about the court of Versailles. There was Damiana, who'd been a warrior in ancient Rome and now trained the younger vampires in combat. They all treated Rosalie with a careful respect that bordered on reverence, and it took her several visits to understand why. You're the king's mate, Lucien explained one evening while Kyril was handling some business. That makes you royalty in our world, whether you accept the bond or not. We're honor-bound to protect you. I'm not royalty, Rosalie protested. I'm just a nurse from a small town. You're the woman our king has been waiting 3 centuries to find, Damiana said, her voice gentle. That makes you precious beyond measure. Kyril showed her the library, a vast room filled with books in a dozen languages, many of them centuries old. He showed her the gardens, where night-blooming flowers filled the air with perfume. He showed her the ballroom, with its polished floors and glittering chandeliers, and told her stories of the gatherings that had been held there over the years. And slowly, carefully, he courted her. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply spent time with her, talking and laughing and sharing pieces of his long life. He told her about the night he'd been turned, the terror and pain of the transformation. He told her about the years he'd spent learning to control his hunger, to be more than just a monster. He told her about building Ashenmoor, about creating a place where vampires and humans could coexist in peace. And Rosalie found herself falling for him. It wasn't just his beauty, though he was certainly beautiful. It wasn't just his power, though she could feel the strength that radiated from him. It was his kindness, his patience, the way he listened to her talk about her work at the hospital with genuine interest. It was the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world. It was the way he made her feel safe, even though he was technically the most dangerous thing she'd ever encountered. 2 weeks after their first meeting, Rosalie arrived at the manor to find Kyril waiting for her in the entrance hall, dressed in formal attire. He looked like he'd stepped out of a fairy tale, all elegant lines and regal bearing. I have something to show you, he said, offering her his arm. If you're willing. Always, Rosalie said, taking his arm. He led her down through corridors she'd never seen before, deep into the foundations of the manor. Finally, they reached a massive door bound in iron. Kyril produced a key from his pocket and unlocked it, pushing the door open to reveal a sight that stole Rosalie's breath. It was a throne room, carved from living stone and lit by hundreds of candles. The ceiling soared overhead, supported by pillars carved with intricate designs. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat 2 thrones. One was clearly ancient, carved from black stone and inlaid with silver. The other was newer but no less beautiful, carved from white marble and waiting, empty. This is the heart of my kingdom, Kyril said quietly. The place where I hold court, where I meet with other vampire lords, where I pass judgment on those who break our laws. I've ruled from here for 3 centuries, Rosalie. Alone. He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. I don't want to be alone anymore, he said. I want you beside me, not just as my mate but as my queen, my equal, my partner in all things. Rosalie's heart was hammering. Kyril, I know this is fast, he interrupted. I know you've only known me for 2 weeks, but I've lived for 300 years and I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you. You're my light in the darkness, Rosalie, my anchor, my reason to be more than just a king. You make me want to be better, to be worthy of you. You are worthy of me, Rosalie whispered. You saved my life. You've shown me a world I never knew existed. You've been patient and kind and respectful, even when you could have just taken what you wanted. How could you not be worthy? Then say yes, Kyril said, his crimson eyes burning with intensity. Say you'll stay. Say you'll be mine, as I am yours. Rosalie looked at him, at this beautiful, ancient, powerful man who was looking at her like she hung the moon and stars. She thought about the past 2 weeks, about the laughter and the conversations and the growing certainty in her heart that she'd found something rare and precious. She thought about the alternative. Going back to her ordinary life, never seeing him again, always wondering what might have been. The choice was easier than it should have been. Yes, she said. Yes, Kyril, I'll stay. I'll be yours. The smile that spread across his face was incandescent. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and for a moment they just stood there, holding each other in the candlelight. I need to tell you something, Kyril said after a while, his voice muffled against her hair. Something important about what this means. Rosalie pulled back to look at him. What? If you're truly going to be my queen, if you're going to rule beside me, you'll need to be turned. To become a vampire yourself. It's the only way you'll survive in this world. The only way you'll be safe from the dangers that come with being at my side. Rosalie had known this was coming. She'd done enough reading in Kyril's library over the past 2 weeks to understand the basics of vampire politics. A human queen would be seen as weak, a liability. She would age and die while Kyril remained eternal. What does the transformation involve, she asked. Pain, Kyril said honestly. I won't lie to you. The turning is agonizing. It will feel like every cell in your body is being torn apart and rebuilt. It takes 3 days and you'll be conscious for all of it, but I'll be with you every moment. I'll hold your hand and help you through it, and when it's over you'll be strong, fast, immortal. You'll be my equal in every way that matters. Will I have to kill people? Feed on innards? No, Kyril said firmly. I'll teach you control just as I learned it. You'll be able to survive on donated blood, on willing volunteers. You'll never have to hurt anyone. Rosalie was quiet for a long moment, thinking, and if I say no, if I want to stay human, then we'll find another way, Kyril said immediately. I won't force this on you, Rosalie. Your choice, your autonomy, they matter more to me than tradition or politics. If you want to remain human, we'll make it work." Somehow, she could hear the sincerity in his voice, could see it in his eyes. He meant it. He would give up centuries of tradition, would weather the disapproval of other vampire lords, would find a way to protect her as a human if that was what she wanted, which only made her more certain of her decision. "I want to be turned," Rosalie said. "I want to stand beside you as your equal. I want forever with you, Kyril." His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again they were bright with unshed tears. "You honor me," he whispered. "More than you know." "When?" Rosalie asked. "Whenever you're ready. There's no rush. Take time to prepare, to say goodbye to your human life. I want you to be certain." "I am certain," Rosalie said. "But you're right, I need to settle some things first. Give notice at the hospital. Close out my apartment. Maybe a week?" "A week then." Kyril agreed. He pulled her close again, pressing a kiss to her forehead. 7 days and then you'll begin your new life. Our life together." Rosalie spent the next week in a whirlwind of activity. She gave notice at the hospital, claiming a family emergency that required her to move out of state. Her co-workers threw her a goodbye party, and Rosalie felt a pang of guilt at the deception, but Kyril had been clear. The fewer people who knew about the vampire world, the safer everyone was. She sold most of her furniture, packed up her belongings, and moved them to Ashwood Manor. Kyril had given her a suite of rooms in the East Wing, beautifully appointed and filled with light during the day. They would be her quarters until the transformation was complete, and then she would move to the royal chambers with him. On the 7th day, Rosalie woke early and stood in her apartment one last time, looking around at the life she was leaving behind. It had been a good life, a simple life, but it had also been lonely, limited. She'd spent so many years just existing, going through the motions. With Kyril, she would truly live. She locked the door for the last time and drove to Ashwood Manor. The sun was setting as she arrived, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Kyril was waiting for her at the entrance, and the look on his face when he saw her made her heart skip. "Are you ready?" he asked, taking her hand. "Yes," Rosalie said, "I'm ready." He led her to his private chambers, a suite of rooms in the highest tower of the manor. The bedroom was magnificent, all dark wood and velvet curtains with a massive bed draped in silk. Kyril had explained that she would need to rest during the transformation, that her body would need to shut down and rebuild itself. "Lie down," Kyril said gently, guiding her to the bed. "Get comfortable." Rosalie settled against the pillows, her heart racing. Kyril sat beside her, taking her hand in both of his. "I'm going to drain your blood until you're on the edge of death," he explained, his voice soft. "Then I'll feed you my blood and the transformation will begin. It's going to hurt, Rosalie, but I promise you, I'll be right here. I won't leave you for a single moment." "I trust you," Rosalie said, and she meant it. Kyril leaned down, brushing his lips against hers in a gentle kiss. "I love you," he whispered. "I know I haven't said it before, but I do. I love you more than I thought possible." "I love you too," Rosalie whispered back. Then Kyril's mouth moved to her throat, and she felt the sharp sting of his fangs breaking skin. The draining was strange, but not unpleasant. She could feel her blood flowing out, could feel herself growing weaker, but Kyril's arms were around her, holding her secure. He was murmuring to her in a language she didn't understand, old words that sounded like a prayer. When she was on the very edge of consciousness, when the world was starting to go dark, Kyril pulled back. She heard him tear into his own wrist, and then he was pressing it to her lips. "Drink!" He commanded. Rosalie drank. The transformation hit her like a lightning strike. Every nerve in her body ignited with pain, a searing agony that made her scream. She felt Kyril's arms tighten around her, felt him pulling her against his chest, but the pain was overwhelming, all-consuming. "I'm here," Kyril was saying, over and over. "I'm here, my love. I'm here. You're so strong. You're doing so well. Just hold on." The pain went on and on, wave after wave of it crashing over her. Her bones were breaking and reforming. Her heart was stuttering and restarting. Her entire body was being unmade and remade, transformed from human to something else entirely. And through it all, Kyril held her. He didn't flinch, didn't turn away. He held her and murmured encouragement and wiped the tears from her face with gentle fingers. Time lost all meaning. Hours blurred into days. The pain would fade to a dull roar and then surge back with renewed intensity. Rosalie lost count of how many times she screamed, how many times she begged for it to stop. But Kyril never left her side. On the 3rd day, the pain finally began to recede. Rosalie opened her eyes and the world was different, sharper, brighter. She could hear things she'd never heard before, the rustle of fabric, the whisper of air through the ventilation system, the sound of footsteps 3 floors below, and she could feel Kyril beside her, the bond between them now fully formed, a golden thread connecting their souls. "Rosalie?" Kyril's voice was rough with exhaustion and relief. "How do you feel?" Rosalie sat up slowly, testing her new body. She felt strong, powerful, alive in a way she'd never experienced before. "Different," she said, and her voice was the same but also not. carrying a resonance it had never had before. I feel different. Look, Kyril said, gesturing to the mirror across the room. Rosalie stood on legs that felt steadier than they ever had and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at her was familiar but changed. Her skin was paler now, luminous like Kyril's. Her hair was still the same auburn color, but it seemed to shine with an inner light. And her eyes were crimson now, bright and inhuman and beautiful. I'm a vampire, she whispered. You're my queen, Kyril corrected, coming to stand behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. My mate, my forever. Rosalie leaned back against him, marveling at the feel of it, the rightness. The bond between them was singing now, a constant awareness of his presence, his emotions, his love for her. What happens now? She asked. Now, Kyril said, we have a coronation to plan. I need to present you to the other vampire lords to make your position official, and then, my darling, we have eternity together. The coronation was held a month later, in the throne room deep beneath Ashwood Manor. Vampire lords and ladies came from across the continent, ancient and powerful beings who ruled their own territories. Rosalie stood beside Kyril in a gown of deep crimson, her white hair styled in an elaborate updo, and felt their eyes on her. She'd been nervous about this, about meeting Kyril's peers, about being judged and found wanting. But Kyril's hand was in hers, steady and sure, and the bond between them was a constant source of strength. Lords and ladies, Kyril's voice rang out through the throne room, commanding and regal. I present to you Rosalie of House Ashwood, my mate and your queen. She has undergone the transformation and proven herself worthy. I ask now for your recognition and your fealty. There was a long moment of silence. Then an ancient vampire lord, his skin like parchment and his eyes like chips of ice, stepped forward. How do we know she is truly your mate, Kyril of Ashwood? He asked. How do we know this is not merely infatuation? Kyril's eyes flashed with anger, but before he could respond, Rosalie squeezed his hand. I'll answer that, she said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, strong. You don't know. You'll have to take our word for it, or you'll have to trust the evidence of your own eyes. Look at us. Look at the bond between us. It's visible to any vampire with the sight to see it. The ancient lord studied them for a long moment, his gaze sharp and assessing. Then slowly he bowed. I see it, he said. The mating bond, golden and true. Welcome, Queen Rosalie. House Ashwood honors you. One by one, the other vampire lords and ladies came forward, offering their recognition, their respect, their fealty. By the end of the night, Rosalie had been accepted as Kyril's queen, as one of the rulers of the vampire world, and when the last guest had left, when they were finally alone in the throne room, Kyril pulled Rosalie into his arms and kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. You were magnificent, he murmured against her lips. So strong, so regal. I've never been more proud. I had a good teacher, Rosalie said, smiling. Come, Kyril said, taking her hand. Let me show you something. He led her to the white marble throne, the one that had been carved for her. Sit, he said. Rosalie sat, feeling the cool stone beneath her. Kyril knelt before her, taking her hands in his, and the sight of this powerful vampire king on his knees before her made her breath catch. I kneel for no one, Kyril said softly. But for you I would kneel 1,000 times. You are my queen, Rosalie, my equal, my love, and I will spend eternity proving to you that choosing me was the right decision. It was, Rosalie said, pulling him up to sit beside her. It absolutely was. They sat together on their thrones, king and queen, mates bound by blood and love and destiny, and looked out over the empty throne room that would one day be filled with their subjects, their allies, their friends. Tell me about the future, Rosalie said. What do we do now? We rule, Kyril said simply. We protect our territory and our people. We build alliances and maintain peace. We face whatever challenges come our way together. Sounds like a lot of work, Rosalie said. It is, Kyril agreed. But it's also rewarding, and we'll have eternity to figure it out. Eternity, Rosalie repeated, testing the word. It didn't seem real yet, the idea that she would never age, never die, that she would spend forever with this man beside her. Having second thoughts? Kyril asked, a note of concern in his voice. Not even for a second, Rosalie said, leaning over to kiss him. I love you, Kyril. Forever isn't nearly long enough. The years passed in a blur of activity and joy. Rosalie threw herself into her new role as queen, learning the intricacies of vampire politics, building relationships with the other lords and ladies, working alongside Kyril to keep their territory safe and prosperous. She discovered that she had a gift for diplomacy, for finding common ground and negotiating peace between feuding factions. Kyril joked that she was wasted on him, that she should have been a queen in her human life, but Rosalie knew better. This was where she was meant to be. At Kyril's side, ruling their kingdom, protecting their people. They faced challenges, of course. There were vampire lords who resented Kyril's progressive policies, who thought humans should be prey rather than protected. There were hunters who saw all vampires as monsters and needed to be convinced that Ashwood's territory was different. And there was the incident with the rogue vampire, a young one who'd lost control and killed 3 humans in a neighboring town. Kyril had been furious, ready to execute the rogue on the spot, but Rosalie had intervened. He's young, she'd said, studying the terrified vampire who was being held by Kyril's guards. He hasn't learned control yet. Give him a chance. Let us teach him. He murdered 3 people. Kyril had argued. That cannot go unpunished. I'm not saying it should, Rosalie had countered. But execution seems extreme for someone who didn't know better. Exile, maybe, or intensive training under supervision. Something that gives him a chance to be better. Kyril had looked at her for a long moment, conflict clear on his face. Then he'd sighed. Very well, he'd said. But he's your responsibility. If he kills again, the blood is on both our hands. Rosalie had accepted that burden. She'd worked with the young vampire, teaching him control, helping him understand the value of human life. It had taken months, but eventually he'd mastered his hunger, had learned to feed without killing. He'd become one of their most loyal subjects, grateful for the second chance they'd given him. Kyril had pulled her aside after that, looking at her with something like awe. You make me better, he'd said. I would have killed him without a second thought. But you saw potential where I saw only danger. You gave him a chance to prove himself. That kind of mercy, that wisdom, it's what makes you a great queen. We balance each other, Rosalie had said, taking his hand. You give me strength and I give you compassion. Together, we're better than either of us could be alone. 5 years after her transformation, Rosalie stood in the gardens of Ashwood Manor, watching the moon rise over the valley. It was the anniversary of the night she'd been bitten by the serpent, the night her entire life had changed. She heard footsteps behind her and smiled as Kyril's arms wrapped around her waist. What are you thinking about? He asked, resting his chin on her shoulder. How lucky I am, Rosalie said. That serpent could have killed me, but instead it led me to you. I think about that sometimes, Kyril admitted. What would have happened if I hadn't been there that night? If I'd taken a different path through the woods, or if I'd decided to stay home? You would have died, and I never would have known what I was missing. But you were there, Rosalie said, turning in his arms to face him. You saved me, and now we have this. Forever together. Forever together, Kyril echoed, leaning down to kiss her. As they stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, Rosalie felt a familiar stirring in her chest. She'd been feeling it for weeks now, a strange awareness, a sense of something different in her body. Kyril, she said slowly, is it possible for vampires to have children? Kyril pulled back, his eyes widening. It's rare. Incredibly rare. Most vampires are sterile, but mated pairs sometimes can conceive, especially if the bond is strong. Why do you ask? Rosalie took his hand and placed it over her abdomen. Because I think I might be pregnant. Kyril went very still. Then his eyes flared bright crimson, and a smile spread across his face that was pure joy. You're certain? He asked. No, Rosalie admitted. But I've been feeling different, and I know it's possible. I've been reading about it in the library. We should find out for certain, Kyril said, already pulling her toward the manor. Seraphine has medical training. She can examine you. 20 minutes later, Rosalie was sitting in Seraphine's private chambers while the older vampire examined her with gentle, efficient hands. Kyril was pacing the room like a caged animal, his anxiety obvious. Finally, Seraphine stepped back, a small smile on her usually stern face. Congratulations, Your Majesties, she said. You're about 4 weeks along. The child is healthy and developing normally. Kyril let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled Rosalie into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. We're having a baby, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Rosalie, we're having a baby. We're having a baby, Rosalie repeated, laughing and crying at the same time. Seraphine cleared her throat delicately. I should warn you, vampire pregnancies are different from human ones. The gestation period is shorter, about 6 months instead of 9, and the child will be born with some vampiric traits already active. They'll need blood from birth. We'll figure it out, Kyril said, setting Rosalie back on her feet but keeping his arms around her. Whatever we need to do, we'll make it work. The pregnancy was challenging but not unbearable. Rosalie's vampire healing meant she avoided many of the unpleasant symptoms human women experienced, but she had her own set of challenges to deal with. Her hunger for blood increased dramatically, and she found herself feeding twice as often as before. Kyril was attentive to the point of being overbearing. He insisted she rest constantly, refused to let her attend any potentially dangerous meetings, and nearly had a panic attack when she wanted to go for a walk in the gardens alone. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, Rosalie finally snapped one evening 4 months into the pregnancy. I can still function, Kyril. I know, he said, looking sheepish. I'm sorry, I just worry. This is our child, Rosalie, our miracle. I can't bear the thought of anything happening to either of you. Rosalie's expression softened. Nothing is going to happen. I'm strong, the baby is healthy, and I have the best medical care in the world. You need to relax. I'll try. Kyril promised he did try, though with mixed success. But Rosalie found his overprotectiveness more endearing than annoying. After centuries of being alone, he was finally getting the family he'd never thought possible. Of course he was anxious. The baby was born on a cold winter night, 6 months to the day after Rosalie had discovered she was pregnant. The labor was intense but mercifully short, lasting only a few hours, and when the midwife placed the baby in Rosalie's arms, she fell in love all over again. "It's a boy," the midwife said softly. He was perfect, small but strong, with a shock of white hair and eyes that were already beginning to show hints of crimson. He looked up at Rosalie with an alert, intelligent gaze, and she knew immediately that he was going to be extraordinary. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I'm your mother." Kyril was at her side instantly, staring down at their son with wonder on his face. "He's beautiful," he breathed. "What should we name him?" Rosalie asked. They'd discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had never settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Rosalie knew exactly what he should be called. "Henrik," she said. "Henrik Ashwood." "Henrik," Kyril repeated, testing the name. Then he smiled. "It's perfect. He's perfect." Henrik Ashwood proved to be a handful from the very beginning. He was stronger than a human baby, faster, more aware. By the time he was 6 months old, he was walking. By a year, he was running through the manor at speeds that would have terrified a human parent. But Kyril and Rosalie weren't human parents, and they adapted quickly. They child-proofed the entire manor, set up wards to keep Henrik from wandering into dangerous areas, and hired a full-time nanny who was also a vampire and could keep up with their energetic son. "He's going to be a terror when he gets older," Rosalie said one evening, watching Henrik zoom around the gardens at impossible speed. "Absolutely," Kyril agreed, grinning. "I can't wait." As Henrik grew, Rosalie found herself marveling at the life she'd built. She was a queen, ruling over a vast territory alongside the man she loved. She was a mother, raising a son who would one day be one of the most powerful vampires in the world. She was a leader, respected by her subjects and feared by her enemies. And she was happy. Truly, deeply happy. 10 years after her transformation, Rosalie stood once again in the throne room. But this time it was filled with vampires from across the continent. They'd gathered for a celebration, the 10th anniversary of her coronation as queen. Kyril stood beside her, his hand in hers, and Henrik sat on a smaller throne between them, his young face serious as he watched the proceedings. At 10 years old, he looked about 6 in human terms, but he had the bearing of someone much older. "My friends," Kyril said, his voice carrying through the throne room, "we gather tonight to celebrate a decade of prosperity and peace. A decade since Rosalie became my queen and changed our world for the better. Under her guidance, we've built stronger alliances, created better protections for our human neighbors, and proven that vampires and humans can coexist in harmony." There was a murmur of agreement from the assembled vampires. "But more than that," Kyril continued, his crimson eyes finding Rosalie's, "she's given me a family, a son, a reason to build a better world for the future, and for that I am eternally grateful." He raised his glass, and the other vampires followed suit. "To Queen Rosalie," he said, "my mate, my love, my forever." "To Queen Rosalie," the crowd echoed. Rosalie felt tears prick her eyes. She stood, her glass raised, and looked out over the assembled vampires. "Thank you," she said, "all of you, for accepting me, for supporting us, for believing in the vision of a better world. I promise you, I will spend every day of my immortal life working to make that vision a reality." The applause was thunderous, and as Rosalie sat back down, Kyril leaned over to kiss her temple. "That was beautiful," he murmured. "I meant every word," Rosalie said. Later that night, after the guests had left and Henrik had been put to bed, Kyril and Rosalie stood together in their private chambers. Kyril pulled her close, swaying with her in a slow dance even though there was no music. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Giving up your human life, all the things you might have experienced?" "Never," Rosalie said immediately. "My human life was fine, but it was nothing compared to this. To you, to Henrik, to everything we've built together, I wouldn't trade a single moment of it." "I was so afraid that night in the woods," Kyril admitted. "When I tasted your blood and felt the bond, I was terrified. I thought you'd reject me, reject this world. I thought I'd lose you before I'd even really found you." "I was afraid too," Rosalie said. "But you gave me a choice. You respected me enough to let me decide for myself. That's why I stayed, Kyril, not because of destiny or fate or the mating bond, because you treated me like an equal from the very beginning." "You are my equal," Kyril said fiercely, "in every way that matters. You're stronger than you know. Rosalie, you've changed the vampire world, made it better, more compassionate. And you've changed me, made me more than just a king. You've made me a better man." "We've changed each other," Rosalie corrected. "That's what love does, it makes us better." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, the bond between them humming with contentment. "What do you think the future holds?" Rosalie asked eventually. "More challenges," Kyril said honestly. "There will always be threats, always be problems to solve. But we'll face them together, just like we've faced everything else. And in between the challenges, we'll have moments like this, quiet moments, happy moments. Moments with our son and whatever other children we might have. You want more children? Rosalie asked, surprised. If you do, Kyril said. I never thought I'd have even one. But Henrik has been such a joy. The idea of having more, of building a larger family, it's appealing. Rosalie thought about it. The pregnancy had been difficult and raising Henrik was exhausting. But it was also incredibly rewarding. And the thought of giving Henrik siblings, of expanding their family, made her smile. Let's wait a few more years, she said. Let Henrik get a little older. But yes, I think I'd like more children eventually. Kyril's smile was radiant. He swept her up into his arms and carried her to their bed, and they spent the rest of the night celebrating their past and dreaming about their future. 20 years after that night in the woods, Rosalie stood in the gardens of Ashwood Manor, watching her children play. Henrik was 30 now, looking about 18 in human terms, and he was chasing his younger brother through the flower beds. Zephyr was 15, with the same white hair and crimson eyes as his father and brother, but with Rosalie's stubborn chin and quick temper. He was laughing as he dodged Henrik's attempts to catch him, moving with the supernatural speed all vampire children possessed. Rosalie rested a hand on her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. Their third child was due any day now, another boy if Seraphine's predictions were correct. They're going to wake the neighbors, Kyril said, coming up beside her with a fond smile on his face. Let them, Rosalie said. It's good for Henrik and Zephyr to burn off energy, otherwise they'll be bouncing off the walls all night.
Fair point,
Kyril conceded. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close.
How are you feeling? Huge,
Rosalie said with a laugh. This baby is bigger than the other two were. I swear I'm going to explode. You look beautiful, Kyril said, pressing a kiss to her temple. You have to say that. You're my husband. I say it because it's true, Kyril insisted. You're radiant, Rosalie. You always are. Before Rosalie could respond, she felt a sharp pain in her abdomen. She gasped, her hand flying to her belly. Rosalie? Kyril's voice was immediately concerned. What is it? I think the baby's coming, Rosalie said breathlessly. Kyril went into immediate action, scooping her up into his arms and calling out to Henrik, Get Seraphine now, your mother's in labor. Henrik nodded and disappeared, moving so fast he was just a blur. Zephyr ran over, his young face worried. Is Mama okay? He asked. She's fine, Kyril assured him, though his voice was tight with tension. She's going to have the baby, that's all. Go find your nanny. Zephyr ran off, and Kyril carried Rosalie into the manor up to their chambers. By the time they arrived, Seraphine was already there, setting up her medical supplies with practiced efficiency. On the bed, she instructed, and Kyril placed Rosalie down gently. The labor progressed quickly, as vampire labors always did. Within a few hours, Rosalie was holding another perfect baby boy in her arms. He had white hair like his brother's, but his eyes, when they opened, were a stunning violet, a unique color she'd never seen before. He's beautiful, Rosalie whispered, exhausted but happy. What should we name him? Kyril asked, sitting beside her on the bed and looking down at their newest son with wonder. Felix, Rosalie said immediately. It means happy, lucky. And we are lucky, Kyril. So incredibly lucky. Felix Ashwood, Kyril said, trying out the name. I love it. Henrik and Zephyr were allowed, and a few minutes later, both of them eager to meet their new brother. Henrik held Felix with the careful competence of someone who'd already done this before with Zephyr, while Zephyr looked on with wide eyes. He's so small, Zephyr said. You were that small once too, Rosalie reminded him. Was I really? Zephyr asked, sounding skeptical. You were, Kyril confirmed, and now look at you, growing up so fast. As Rosalie watched her family, her 3 sons and her husband all gathered around her, she felt a wave of profound gratitude wash over her. This life, this family, this love, it was more than she'd ever dreamed possible. And it had all started with a serpent bite and a vampire king who'd knelt in the dirt to save her life. The years continued to pass, marked by joy and challenges in equal measure. Henrik grew into a strong, capable young man, already showing the leadership qualities that would one day make him a great king. Zephyr was more impulsive, but he had a good heart and a fierce loyalty to his family. And Felix, their youngest, was quiet and thoughtful, with a gift for magic that surprised them all. Rosalie threw herself into her work as queen, using her position to create better protections for humans in vampire territories, to establish laws that prevented abuse and exploitation. She negotiated treaties with human governments, creating a framework for peaceful coexistence that became a model for the entire continent. And through it all, Kyril was by her side. Her partner, her love, her anchor. They had their disagreements, of course. There were nights when they argued about policy or parenting or the 1,000 other things that couples argue about. But they always came back to each other, always found their way back to the love that bound them together. 50 years after her transformation, Rosalie stood in the throne room once more, but this time it was for Henrik's coronation. He was 50 years old now, looking about 25 in human terms, and he was ready to take on more responsibility in the kingdom, Kyril had decided to name him Crown Prince, officially recognizing him as heir to the throne. It was a momentous occasion, and vampires from across the world had gathered to witness it. As Rosalie watched Kyril place the crown on Henrik's head, watched her son kneel and swear his oath of fealty, she felt tears streaming down her face. Her baby, her firstborn, was growing up. He was becoming a man, a leader, someone who would one day rule this kingdom with wisdom and compassion. After the ceremony, Henrik came to her, still wearing his crown, and pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you, Mother," he said softly, "for everything, for raising me, for teaching me, for showing me what it means to be a good leader." "You're going to be amazing," Rosalie said, pulling back to cup his face in her hands. "I'm so proud of you, Henrik, so incredibly proud." "I couldn't have done any of this without you and Father," Henrik said. "You've given me the best example to follow." Rosalie hugged him again, overwhelmed with emotion. When she finally let go, Kyril was there, his arms sliding around her waist. "Our son, the Crown Prince," he said, his voice thick with pride. "I know," Rosalie said, leaning into him. "I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Kyril said. "We did this, Rosalie. We built this family, this legacy, and it's beautiful." 100 years after that night in the woods, Rosalie stood on the balcony of Ashwood Manor, looking out over the valley. The town had grown over the decades, expanding into a small city, but it had retained its charm, and under her and Kyril's protection, it had become one of the safest, most prosperous places in the region. She heard footsteps behind her and smiled as Kyril joined her, 2 glasses of wine in his hands. He handed one to her, and they stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the lights of the city below. "Do you remember that night?" Kyril asked eventually. "When I found you in the woods." "Every detail," Rosalie said. "I was so scared. I thought I was going to die." "I was scared too," Kyril admitted. "When I tasted your blood and felt the bond, I was terrified. I'd waited 300 years for you, Rosalie. What if you didn't want me? What if I lost you before we'd even begun?" "You saved me," Rosalie said simply. "You could have just walked away, let me die. But you knelt in the dirt and drew the venom out, even though you had no idea if it would work. You risked yourself for a stranger. How could I not fall in love with you after that?" "I would do it again in a heartbeat," Kyril said. "I would do anything for you, Rosalie, then, now, forever." "I know," Rosalie said, setting down her glass so she could take his hand. "And I would do anything for you. We're in this together, Kyril. Always." They stood there on the balcony, looking out over the kingdom they'd built, the family they'd raised, the life they'd created together. 100 years had passed since that fateful night, but the love between them was as strong as ever, the bond as bright. "Tell me about the next 100 years, Rosalie said. "What do you see?" "I see us," Kyril said, "still standing here, still ruling together. I see our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. I see a world that's better because we were in it, and I see you, Rosalie. Always you, until the end of time." "That sounds perfect," Rosalie said, and it was. 200 years after her transformation, Rosalie attended Henrik's coronation as king. Kyril had decided it was time to step down, to let the next generation take the lead. He would remain as an advisor, a mentor, but the day-to-day running of the kingdom would fall to Henrik now. It was bittersweet, watching her son take the throne, but it was also right. Henrik was ready. He had Kyril's strength and Rosalie's compassion, and he would be a great king. After the ceremony, Rosalie and Kyril retreated to a smaller estate on the edge of the territory, a quiet place where they could finally have some peace. Their other sons visited often, bringing their own families, filling the house with laughter and joy. And Rosalie and Kyril finally had time to just be, to travel, to explore, to rediscover each other without the weight of ruling a kingdom on their shoulders. They visited the old countries, saw the places where Kyril had been born and raised. They traveled across continents, meeting other vampires, other supernatural beings, expanding their understanding of the world. And every night they came back to each other, to the bond that had saved them both, that had given them a life beyond anything they'd imagined. 300 years after that night in the woods, Rosalie stood once more in Thornwood Forest. She'd come here every year on the anniversary, to the exact spot where the serpent had bitten her ankle, where Kyril had knelt and drawn the venom out. It had become a tradition, a way of honoring the moment that had changed everything. Kyril stood beside her, his hand in hers, and they looked at the spot where it had all begun. 300 years, Rosalie said softly. "It feels like a lifetime and a moment all at once." "I know what you mean," Kyril said. "Sometimes I can barely remember what my life was like before you. It feels like you've always been there." "I have been," Rosalie said, squeezing his hand, "for 300 years, and I'll be there for 300 more, and 300 after that, and on until the end of everything." "Promise?" Kyril asked, his voice soft and vulnerable in a way it rarely was. "I promise," Rosalie said. She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I love you, Kyril Ashwood. I will love you forever. Nothing will ever change that." Kyril pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and they stood there in the forest where their story had begun. surrounded by the memories of 3 centuries together. I love you too, Kyril whispered into her hair. More than words can say. You are my heart, Rosalie. My soul, my everything. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other. 2 immortal beings who had found something precious and rare in each other. The world would keep turning, centuries would keep passing, but their love would remain constant, unshakable, eternal. And as they finally turned to leave the forest, walking hand in hand back toward their home, Rosalie looked up at the stars and felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the serpent that had bitten her, for the vampire king who had saved her, for the life they had built together. It had been 300 years since that night, and every single day had been a gift. Every moment with Kyril, every laugh with their children, every challenge they'd faced and overcome together, all of it had been worth it. And as they stepped out of the forest and into the moonlight, Rosalie knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. King and queen, mate and mate, 2 souls bound by blood and love and an eternity of devotion. Forever.